Hello everyone, my name is Sana Ahmed and I have recently completed my PhD from Henley Business School. Prior to starting my PhD at Henley Business School, I worked as an assistant professor for about 10 years at the top university of Pakistan. My area of expertise is in management, business and human resource. I've also done a lot of industry consultancies, primarily with multinational companies around the globe. The topic of my research is employees' DEI experiences in MNC subsidiaries locally situated in Pakistan. The reason that it caught my interest was that for quite some time, the literature on diversity and inclusion has been very diverse and constantly under attack, especially after the Trump's new administration. So this is where the researchers and practitioners are constantly struggling when it comes to what works and how it works. So the basic idea behind was there were three different categories that made me interested in the topic. The first one was the context itself. My study was based in my home country, which was Pakistan. The reason that I picked Pakistan was that Pakistan in the DEI research is an under-researched and under-explored context. A lot of DEI research has primarily been focused on in the European countries or in the Western world, and there have been calls for extending the geographical reach of this DEI research to under-researched research and under-explored context. Pakistan is a unique context on its own. Reason is that it is considered as one of the emerging economies. Its strategic location is it's very good because of it links to Central Asian energy-rich countries, and also because of the CPEC, there are lots of MNCs now investing in Pakistan and situating their local offices in the country. However, on the other end, Asia Pacific region has never been a region of interest for management researchers. The reason is that it has been considered as a relatively homogeneous region, while the reality is very different. I have just picked Pakistan, and Pakistan's alone social and cultural context is so rich because of its unique social-cultural, political, legal, religious, and political peculiarities, making it as a very interesting context to study the DEI experiences. Why did I focus on MNCs? Because if we look at the MNCs in theory and in practice, there are very opposite views about them. In literature as well as in practice, where MNCs are considered as social agents, they are applauded for their access to resources and access to information and knowledge. Reason is that they have, because of their geographical expansion, they operate in different countries, different regions, but at the same time, they have also been criticized for abusing their power, especially in the area of environment and human relations. So this altogether made it a very interesting avenue to explore, because I wanted to look at that how MNC's global DEI agendas get translated into a local context like Pakistan, which is marked by weak regulatory frameworks. It was an interesting avenue to explore. The third thing that's very important in my thesis is a focus on employee experiences. A lot of focus previously in the DEI research has remained on the organization initiatives or organizational leaders or organizational outcomes, which are primarily in the shape of profitability and organizational effectiveness. While I look at the employee experiences as a contextually embodied phenomena, a context-specific construct, which is determined by the interplay of macro, meso, and micro level factors. So the idea behind whole research was that if you look at the DEI literature, it can be clearly categorized into three major categories. There's a whole body of DEI research that focus on what we call as a business case model of diversity. Now, that bit of DEI research is more focused on increasing diversity in the organization, and by diversity they meant observable diversity, people from diverse backgrounds. the idea behind bringing in diversity, or the idea behind workforce diversity at that point, was to what diversity or diverse workforce could do for the organization, which means the focus remained on organizational outcomes, more specifically on profitability of the organization, the financial metrics as we call it. But with the passage of time, the DEI literature moved forward, and the focus started becoming on the employees themselves, and then this inclusion term came as well. So the focus shifted from having just the number numerically represented diverse workforce to now more on creating feelings of respect, sense of belongingness, and what we call it as organizational inclusion. So this was a very useful movement because the focus now shifted on the employees, looking at that what are the different initiatives that organizations can take in order to encourage inclusion within the organization. However, with the passage of time, because I mentioned earlier that the research was mainly focused on, and has been till date mainly focused on, the Western and the European countries. So the question that came up was that which organizational initiatives would work in which context, for the reason that for me, different organizational initiatives might help me develop a sense of belonging. For you, it might be different. So that's why the question then remains that what are those list of initiatives that's going to enable the organization to create that sense of belongingness or sense of inclusion within the organization. This is where the relational approach and the relational framework comes in, that talks about that it is very difficult to look at DEI as a concept, DEI initiatives as an organizational action, or DEI initiatives, experiences as the employee outcome on its own, without considering the impact of various factors operating at different levels that within the context, which can have an impact on employee DEI experiences or organizational DEI initiatives. What this approach talks about is that the factors that are operating at national level, which includes socio-cultural landscape, political factors, economic factors, religious factors, historical context, they play an important role in how diversity is perceived, how diversity is looked at, and they can also potentially impact organizational initiatives, because we do have another set of theories, the cultural theories, that talk about how national culture can have an impact on organizational culture. I'll get there in a second. And then at the meso level, then you have the organizational initiatives that are impacted by these macro level factors, and they have an impact on how organizations respond to these macro level factors. Then at the micro level, you are looking at the formation of in-groups, how do stereotypes arise, how do different avenues of biases arise, how do different avenues for favoritism arise. So to understand, you have to look at that, how do people connect with each other, how do they form identities, how do they respond to all of these challenges, DEI challenges within the organization. So let me give you an example. For example, in my data, the participants reported that they were being sidelined for promotions, they were not preferred for certain projects because of the reasons that we spoke about. Now it automatically gets you thinking that you see that there's an element of favoritism there. So how should you explain that favoritism? That's an organizational experience, from where that is stemming. So this is where you backtrack a bit. So you look at that organization has formal mechanisms for hiring, firing, promotions and everything. But then there's an informal structures also operating alongside these formal structures. So then the next curious question is that from where this has come. So if you just backtrack it again and look at Pakistan's culture as a context, so you would see that Pakistan is a very highly collectivist culture, which means that there's a very strong inclination towards in-group and out-group, and they put a sharp divide between the people who belong to in-groups and the people who don't. So this is how all of these levels are interconnected, and if you look at one level, it might not give you that holistic picture to be able to understand that what are the different factors that can constrain or facilitate organizational and individual agency. So all of these ideas merge together form the basis of my thesis, because these are the gaps that exist in the literature currently, naming that a less focus on the contextual factors, as I explained earlier, that initiatives, practices, frameworks, models that work in one context may not work in another context, because these contexts are different because of their social, cultural, political, legal, historical peculiarities. The second gap that's very huge existing in the DEI research is its main concentration in the Western world and European countries, while the other regions of the world, especially the global South, is not equally represented in the DEI research. So it's also about expanding the geographical reach of the research. Then also there's a huge gap existing in DEI research when it comes to its focus on the organizational level only. So if you look at that, majority of DEI literature is mainly focused on organizational level factors like organizational initiatives, organizational workforce diversity, organizational outcomes, but very little understanding is there that how different factors operating at different levels and the dynamic interplay between these factors that can impact organizational initiatives. This provides a more holistic picture rather than focusing on any one level. Then there are also the new focus, and a very recent focus has also been on the implementation gaps. So implementation gaps are that what is promised by the organization and then what is being actually delivered. Now there's also a gap between these two things, and the literature is now trying to address the possible reasons for these gaps, that why there's a difference between what organization's intent is and then what actually gets delivered. Then if you look at this because this came as a result of my findings, initially not intended as a identified research gap, but there, if you look at, when I looked at my findings and then I look at the DEI research, I also noticed that there's also a gap of focus on the middle management tier. A lot of DEI research talks about leaders, organizational leaders, and how their different personalities, behaviors, leadership styles, they can have an impact on the success of the organizational initiatives, DEI initiatives, but very little focus on the role of middle managers, which is also a very important hierarchical tier in the implementation chain. So literature also suggests in support of this point that these policies may be amazing at the top, very strategically made, but if they get diluted as they come down to in the hierarchy, so they cannot have that intended impact that the organization had wanted to in the first place. So that is a very important hierarchical tier, and apparently not much has been done to look at that why these middle managers can be disengaged, their lack of ownership, demotivation or dilution happening at the middle management level, and the possible reasons for that. And then an obvious focus on employee experiences, which is again missing because a lot of focus has been on employee outcomes, but very less focus on the actual lived experiences of employees for which these policies and practices are made initially. So when I identified all of these gaps that are existing in the literature, I got interested to explore more, and that's why, for all the reasons that I've explained previously, I picked up Pakistan as a context, which is very diverse, but at the same time, it has a very weak regulatory framework, very highly collectivist country, very high power distance. So it was a very, very interesting avenue to explore that how MNC's global DEI agendas get translated into a context like that. Another reason was that, like I said, that most of the DEI research has been in the Western world, and so are the MNCs. Most of the MNCs that were included in my study have their offices, head offices, and their country of origin in the Western world. So they were exposed to a very different culture. So it was very interesting to see that once they cross geographical boundaries and come to a place which is markedly different from their country of origin, how do they translate those agendas in the local language? Summing up with what I found in my research was that the local context can present itself as a very tension-filled context for the MNC subsidiaries. The reason is that the MNC subsidiaries have this challenge to maintain the global outlook, because that's one company but operating all around the world. So they have this challenge of maintaining the global outlook. And in the absence of strategic flexibility, which I'll also explain in a while, it can lead to misalignment between the parent company and the local subsidiary. That can result in the dilution of initiatives, and for my research, specifically DEI initiatives, at the local subsidiary level, which can lead to employee experiences of disengagement, skepticism, lack of ownership, and demotivation. So my research is useful from a perspective that it brings forward actionable strategies that enables the MNCs to come up with context-specific DEI initiatives that consider the local, social, political, cultural, organizational, and individual level factors.